Welcome to the School of Thought podcast from Whitefield Academy, a Christ-centered college preparatory school in Atlanta, Georgia, serving students from pre-K through 12th grade. In each episode, we'll explore the ideas, people, and stories shaping how we learn, grow in faith, and build community here at Whitefield. From academics and athletics to the arts, sciences, and service, these conversations offer something for educators, parents, and anyone else passionate about Christian education to think about. It's all a part of Whitefield Academy's School of Thought. Welcome to another episode of School of Thought from Whitefield Academy. Today we are joined by Sarah Garletts, Director of Enrollment Management.
Thanks for having me.
So this episode, we're going to explore how enrollment management is more than just numbers. It's about using data-driven insights to create a meaningful, mission-aligned admission process. Today, we'll explore how Whitefield Academy blends hospitality, strategy, and faith to ensure the right families find their place in a Christ-centered learning community. So if you're a fellow educator, admissions professional, or just a school leader, you're not going to want to miss this episode. So Sarah, we work in the same office, but for those who don't know you, could you give us a little bit of your background?
Sure. So my name is Sarah Garletts, and I serve as Director of Enrollment at Whitefield Academy. I have been in this role for 2 years, but with the school for just over 5 years, and started my career actually in college admissions. Loved that field, but when my husband had an opportunity to move to Atlanta from Virginia, started seeking other opportunities and actually landed in independent school admissions. And have been in this field now for just over 10 years and have loved it. I'm mom to 2 boys. So in addition to doing the work for a very long time, I also now get to walk alongside parents as a parent and empathize both with the overwhelming number of steps and some of the stress, but also the sweet joy of this stage of life of applying your kids to school and thinking ahead to their future, which is really fun. And I love my team. I love what I get to do. I love that I get to meet people and hear their stories and celebrate them, and love talking about that a little bit today.
I think we can start off with this idea of admissions as both science and storytelling. So what does data-driven hospitality mean in admissions?
That's good. So, I think a lot of people, when they think about admissions or schools, there's kind of 2 thoughts that you have. I think if you think about it very black and white, you can think about it is I am applying, going through all these steps to get into an institution and hopefully be there. I think about it from a larger institution setting, it might just be thinking through the actual practical pieces. But what I love is that admissions is actually much more about relationships, that it's about hearing people's stories, learning what they love for the purpose of school, learning what the kids' needs are, what they're successful in or where they might be struggling, and being able to walk alongside family and kind of navigate and decipher some of that. As it relates to data, we can know all the things about someone or all the things about an institution, but it's really important that we're paying attention to how those 2 things marry together. And so we are constantly in our office meeting with people, talking to people, but also looking at what works well for our school, whether that's data in terms of the application itself. So what test scores do typically translate well here, or what grades translate well, or what point of entry is a good point for a kid. We're looking at all of that information to inform that. So we look at some of the information that we have historically seen, whether it's related to admissions data or from past test scores that have done well here. And when we work and walk alongside families, it allows us to have a more clear picture and conversation with them about what's realistic for their child. We are, at the end of the day, weighing number of seats open and looking at the data there, or looking at historic yield rates and all of those things. All of that is part of the process. But to do that well, I have to know someone and I have to know their story. And so it's really important that while looking at those numbers, I love math. I always tell people I think math is a huge part of this field, that I'm also listening to what do they need? What is that family seeking? And is this a place where we can marry those things together?
Awesome. Well, first of all, I commend you for being good at math. You're a hero because I'm not good at math. But you've said this phrase before, turning the quantifiable into the qualifiable. Could you expound upon that and what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I actually kind of talk about it both ways. I think when I am sharing, people love to ask me, how are numbers looking in admissions? That's kind of a big question I get asked a lot. And we'll talk a little bit later, I think, about being in an independent school and a Christian, Christ-centered independent school and how that question plays kind of a unique role. And it's kind of an interesting question to ask. But, we are constantly looking to, are we meeting enrollment goals? Are we hitting those numbers? At the end of the day, salaries are based on enrollment. So we want to make sure we're paying attention to that. But we're also at the same time in the field of admissions, and as we meet with families, looking at, are we admitting right fit, mission fit families? And so it's looking at how do we take that data and look at it in a way that qualifies or says this family, even if they don't fit the numbers, might be acceptable or may not be. And in the same way, kind of flipping it on its head, looking at what do we know about a student? What are some key highlights or information or points that we've learned? And how do we measure all of that together to give us some trends and information on how kids with different experiences or families with different backgrounds might be successful at Whitefield? One thing that I often do in admissions is we talked a little bit about everyone's asking about numbers. Our process, we look at all of that, but ultimately it is people that make the admissions decisions. I think admissions is both art and science in a lot of ways. And so when we get to the committee table to say, is this family someone that would be admissible, or is this student someone that would be admissible to Whitefield? We are looking at all the information, but we are doing it in conversation. And as a collective team, we at Whitefield have anywhere from 4 to 6 people reading every file. And we have on our committee anywhere from 6 to 8 people in the room. And that sounds like a lot, but it's really intentional because each person is able to pay attention to different points, sometimes of data, sometimes of information, sometimes stories, and looking at how that all marries together to give us a better picture of a student's success at Whitefield.
How can schools ensure that they are attracting mission fit families?
I think it's really important first to understand what is your mission. Make sure that everyone in your community understands that. I think when you work at a school, maybe it's assumed that everyone understands that. And I have been really fortunate to work at institutions where mission is very clear. It's something that even our students know, but I don't know that that's the norm everywhere. And so I would say step one is understanding what is our mission, what do we hold true to, what is a non-negotiable, making sure the people in your community understand that, whether that's by reiterating the literal mission statement or having different practices in place for your current kids and families and staff members to get it. And then I think once that sort of baseline is established, helping the families that are seeking your school understand that mission. And so I think being clear, I say to my team all the time, we can't be all things to all people. We are going to always treat every single person that comes through our doors with dignity and respect, seeing the Imago Dei in them. They have inherent value because they are human. But that doesn't mean that we are going to check every box that they have. And so I think as a school, it's really important that we're clear on those things. I think it's also okay to say, this is who we are, this is what we will stand firm as truth, but also these are things that maybe this brings a unique perspective and this is something new. New doesn't always necessarily mean anti-mission, but it's important that we understand the difference between that for families. And so I think being clear on that, communicating well, partnering really closely with your communications team. At Whitefield, we marry admissions and communications on the same team very intentionally to make sure that what we're sharing with families as we meet with them is what they're seeing every time they come into contact with us, whether that's digitally or through actual ads, social media, website, all of those things. We want to make sure that they match.
One of the most striking things about my time at Whitefield is how seriously the mission is taken and how we stick to it. I mean, just interviewing the founders and all these people, it's always been mission, mission, mission. What would you say to someone that might be in admissions and maybe their organization is drifting in mission? Like how would you tactfully address that on the internal side, to get on the same page? Is there any?
Yeah, I have been really fortunate to not have been in a place like that. I'm really grateful that the institutions I've worked in are very clear. I think in admissions fields, you have a lot of influence on the culture of your institution. And I think in a lot of moments, you think of that as the people that we bring in. That's how the culture is being influenced. But I think you also have a unique seat in that you can speak to the people in your community about what you're hearing and what you're seeing about people being attracted to your school. So I know people always use the term front door, like admissions is the front door to an institution. And so in that way, if I am always at the front door, I know exactly what people are saying about our school outside of our walls. And so it might not be something you would hear if this is all you're in every day. If you're in a different role, that's not necessarily your job to hear that. But I do hear that and my team does, because that's the seat we sit in. And so there is influence there of taking that to, I don't know, different teams are structured different ways, but if you have a relationship with your head of school or if you have the opportunity to present to the board, to be transparent about that and to speak about that. And not to say like, oh, we've messed up, we've got to fix all these things, but to say, hey, in order to grow in the way that we're hoping, we've got to get more clear. And here's what we're hearing, and here's what we're hoping, and here's how these two things don't match. So using that influence that you inherently have because of where your role is, but also that you have because of the relationships you have to be able to communicate that and speak that. I think you've got to get people on board to help you in that. It's not a one-man job by no means. That's a huge lift, I think, to ask, how do we bring an institution back to mission fit? The other thing I would say is, and this isn't totally what you're asking, but it's something that I've experienced before, is people can also be really quick to assume that a school might be drifting from mission. Or you might hear, I've said this before, I heard it on a podcast, but one person doesn't equal a trend, but there's sometimes the loud one. So I think that it's important to listen when you hear that buzz that we might be drifting from mission, but it's also really important to be confident and secure in your process and in your people, so that when you hear someone who says that, you can get to the root of where is that coming from? Is it true? And if it is true, let's address it. Or is this a moment you experienced with someone that you're taking to be something even bigger? I think that can happen, especially in a Christian institution. We know as believers that the world is not perfect, that we are all fallen, that we are all sinful. But sometimes when someone makes a mistake, we can attribute it to being a mission drift, and that may or may not always be true. So take it all with a grain of salt. Listen to the feedback you're receiving. I don't think I came up with this, but I say it all the time. Feedback is a gift. And with any gift, you decide how you use it. So you can either open that gift and celebrate it, or you can tuck it away in your closet to never be seen again. But it's important that you use it correctly, and that you take that feedback.
That's great. Well, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but this whole idea of a faith-based organization. So faith and enrollment, how does Whitefield integrate both? And maybe could you speak to other organizations too, how they can more strongly integrate them if they're also faith-based?
Sure. I am so grateful to work in a school where that is our priority, is looking at what is God calling us to, where is he leading us as an institution? Because we talked a little bit about the numbers piece. And again, that's like the number one thing people ask me is, how are numbers? And then they'll say, well, numbers don't matter. The Lord will lead the right people to Whitefield. And that's absolutely true. I know that's true. But when you sit in the seat of having to fill the seats, you're like, yeah, but I'm the one who's going to do it through, or he's going to do it through me. And so I think it's this interesting, beautiful tension of knowing you're in that role and you've been called and tasked with a responsibility, and also trusting the Lord. And that's life, right? Like there's so many things in our life that we could talk about where that doesn't naturally happen, where the gospel or the Bible tells us one thing, but we have a hard time seeing it in reality. But I just would say, I think being in a place where that is from the top leadership a priority, to say, how is the Lord directing our school, whether that's through admissions or through development or whatever thing he's leading our school to. I think that is critical. As it relates to our admissions process, I think keeping that as a leader, I have to remind myself to reiterate that all the time. So even in this podcast, I said I struggle sometimes with that tension, but I'm also tasked with leading a team who feels that tension too. And so how am I intentionally taking time to sit in what the Lord is sharing in my life, or what he's calling me to, and then sharing that then with my team so that they can also hear that they don't feel the need to check all the boxes, fill all the seats, make some concessions that we wouldn't ordinarily make just for the sake of numbers, but to really trust in where God is leading us and to stand firm in our mission and what we believe is success for a kid at Whitefield. And so I think I think it's a beautiful thing, but it sometimes can be a really hard thing.
I guess for a part two, this would be for fellow educators, talk a little bit about building a strong strategic enrollment program. So what role does storytelling play in enrollment management? So for our team, and enrollment management is kind of a industry standard, but a newer term. I would say it's probably grown in the last 5 to 10 years or so. And really what that enrollment management is looking at is, as admissions or enrollment leaders, we're considering financial aid, communications, development, like how all of those things, experiences, play into enrollment growth for your institution. So it's not just about admissions. If we have a really strong, robust admissions process and people have a really positive experience, and then they choose to enroll here and their experience is totally different as soon as they start, or maybe not totally, but a little different,
then there's a part of our admissions process that's wrong. I mean, yes, at some level, maybe there's part of our institution that needs to grow, but we want to make sure that they match, that they have just as positive an experience when they come to the school as they did when they were walking through the admissions process. So that's why enrollment management is kind of expanded to be a little bit more about how is this a whole school experience that families from first inquiry all the way to graduation have consistent opportunity and experience. And so storytelling, I think, as it relates to all of that, is both sides of the coin, right? Like, how are we telling the Whitefield story well? How are we celebrating what we're doing here? Are we telling other people about it, inviting them into the story, making them a character in all the things that are happening? And then at the same time, listening to their stories and saying, how do we marry these things? What does this bring to our school to make us better? How does this child find a place in something that already exists to thrive and to celebrate their gifts? Another thing that I say to my team a lot is that we sit in a really beautiful place in admissions where we are both advocates for Whitefield Academy and also advocates for this family walking through this process. It's a little bit like a weird dating relationship, like we're trying to see if they like us, if we like them. But what that does is it allows opportunities to listen really well, to be curious, to ask good questions, so that when we do get to the decision seat, we know both sides so well that we feel confident in the process. We have in our office, we like for families to have at least 4 touch points with a human before they get to the actual admissions decision committee, so that we really feel like when we are presenting, if we pull up a child and we say, this is Nathan and this is who he is and what he loves, that's informed. And so stories are a big part of that. So it's kind of a little bit of both.
What would you say are the biggest challenges facing Christian school admissions today?
I think the world has changed a lot in the last 5 years, and it will continue to, and that's life. I'm definitely not someone who's an alarmist at where we are today. I think the world has always been changing. That's the only constant, right? But I think that, COVID in a weird way was really beneficial for a lot of independent Christian schools. And we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown from that. We grew significantly. I think other schools did as well. You look at some of the data and the research about independent school admissions in 21 and 22 especially, it was off the charts. And last year and this year, we're starting to see a little bit more leveling to what it was before that. So I think a challenge, and this will continue to be one, is that things are constantly changing, that there is no guarantee. But what's really important is that we're paying attention. So we've talked a lot about data. We've got to keep an eye on those trends to know what is happening, using outside resources to help inform some of what we're doing, because that's the constant that's going to be happening. I think for us specifically, what we've noticed to be a little bit of a challenge as a Christian school, we live in a very saturated market. There are over 60 schools within an hour of us that families could consider. And they all are wonderful and offer things that different families might be seeking. And again, we're not all things to all people, and so that's okay. But what we are finding ourselves wrestling with is, I would say we're a unique school in that where we're located, we are kind of one of a kind in that we are the size we are and a Christian school. We're a little bit larger, and so we have a lot more opportunities that kids can engage in. But that also drives our price up. Really great programs mean higher tuition. And at the same time, there are some smaller Christian schools, similar mission, that might be a little bit less expensive. And so that's a tension we find ourselves in, is how do we distinguish ourselves in a market where prices are all over the map, opportunities are all over the map, and how do we say, here's how we're able to offer those things really well as a school? I think we want to be the best. That's part of our mission, is that we believe that God has called us to be excellent. And so we believe in that as a school, but that comes with some harder things sometimes. And so helping families see the value in that, the value in the investment, what they're getting, and the value in being in a school that's a little bit larger. I think that's a big part of it. I think as Christian schools as a whole, we talked about that mission drift piece. I think it's staying rooted in what is biblical truth. I mean, part of our committee process every year is talking through what does Scripture say about this when we look at an application, and not deviating from that when it feels like the world is deviating from that, when that's becoming more gray. So as a school, again, determining not only what is your mission, but what are your values and how do you hold true to those, I think is really important.
What advice would you give to other admissions and enrollment leaders?
I would say know your why, so that as you're looking at the data, that you don't allow that to deviate from what really matters in your decision making. I think pay attention to data, but don't lose the human element. One thing that we actually do in our office is we are pretty diligent in note-taking. So that's that data piece. When I have a conversation with someone, I always go back and write down what we talked about. It might be a quick little moment, but it's to help me the next time I check in with them to say, hey, Nathan, how's your dad doing? Or, hey, Lainey Beth, how's the soccer game, that might have been happening the afternoon after our tour. And I would love, this might be too much of a peek behind the curtain to say, I remember all those things about all those people. And sometimes I do, but I find that intentional note-taking, actually writing it down, sometimes helps it stick better. But when it doesn't, being able to follow up with them to say, hey, we care deeply about the things you care deeply about, I think that is really special and makes someone feel like they're valued. And so I would say, use your tools and your resources to track data to strengthen the human relationship. That's really the marrying of that qualifiable and quantifiable. Build strategies around the mission, not just the numbers. You want to have right fit families. And then collaborate with all the teams on campus. We before this had talked specifically about marketing teams because that's how our department is structured. How are you partnering with your board or your school leadership to make sure that they're on board? Our head of school often says enrollment is everyone's job at Whitefield. So, you can say that, but that doesn't mean necessarily everybody gets it. I know day to day they have to teach math classes or they have to plan events or they have to do social media, whatever it might be. But it's really important that you are partnering across campus and leveraging all the people that you work with to be able to do the enrollment work well. And I would say to do that, you have to have relationships with them too. We talked about relationships with respective families, but I find that when I know a teacher, they are so much more interested in supporting the admissions process when they see why it matters, when they know our team, they know our heart, they're willing to jump in. So I would say building relationships across campus is just as important.
Well, before we close, can you share just maybe one of the most impactful moments you remember in this role, maybe in the past few years?
I have now gone through this process twice as a parent. And as I said, I've been in this for 10 years, but my kids are pretty young. So it took me several years working in admissions before I went through it myself. And it is very nerve-wracking. And you'd think if anybody knew what to expect, it would be me or any other admissions professional. But it's almost like you know too much. But when my oldest applied, I was so nervous and I wasn't sure how it would turn out. And what I found that was really beautiful as a result of it, and thankfully he is here and it's all worked out. And by the second kid, you start to calm down a little bit as a parent, not a lot, but a little bit. But when my oldest went through the process, I think the biggest thing that I learned in it that was so important for me, one was who he is, what he loves, what he values. And he was 4 at the time, so that's going to grow and change. But it was this really beautiful insight into what teachers had, what their impressions were of him, how he is in a classroom, how other people view him as a kind friend. I think that was a really special peek into my child that I didn't expect the admissions process to be. I think I thought of it as, let's check a box to get him into the school, but it offered an opportunity to learn about him and to get to know him better that I didn't expect it to be. So I think as parents approach the admissions process, maybe look at it through that lens of, how am I going to get to know my child better? How am I going to find out what they need or what they're doing well and be open to that? And I think that removes some of the anxiety because yes, there is a box to check at the end of the day. Your kid is looking to go to a school, but long-term, who they are and who they're becoming matters more. And so if you can hold that as your priority, I think that's really important. I think the other thing for me that came out of that experience was it made me better at my job. It made me better understand what parents are walking through, being able to empathize with them when there are hard conversations to be had, how to enter those more gracefully. It's funny, like no one ever teaches you how to have those conversations. It's not like they invite you in and say, watch me make this hard parent phone call. And so it's always one of those things that every year I learn a little bit more the more I do it. But to be a mom and have to sit in this seat to understand what the parents are feeling was really important.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for talking with me. Do you have any final thoughts before we end?
Just thank you for having me, allowing me to share a little bit about Whitefield. It is a special place and we are growing and learning and we love getting to hear families' stories. We love getting to meet new families. So come visit us, come see us. We are in Smyrna, Georgia, pre-K through 12. And it's a really special place and we'd love for you to be a part of it.
Well, there you have it. Data-driven hospitality, mission-fit enrollment, and admissions as both strategy and storytelling. Whitfield's approach to enrollment isn't just about filling seats. It's about building a Christ-centered community with intentionality and care. It's all a part of Whitefield Academy's School of Thought. Until next time, friends.